is the 25th of October, 2020. Chapter 1, Part 3. Karn Village. It was located on the border of the Kingdom of the Empire, near the southern tip of the Azalarizia mountain range, just outside a patch of woodland named the Great Forest of Tal. For a frontier village of the Viestsi Kingdom, its population was unexceptional, 120 souls distributed among 25 families. The village made its living from resources of the forest and agriculture. Apart from doctors and herbalists who came to collect herbs, the only visitors to the village were the yearly tax collectors. Time seemed to stand still for the few residents of this village. Village life was very busy, even in the early hours of the morning. Villagers did not possess the magical illumination of a continual light, which could be found in the cities. So the villagers would rise with the sun and work hard all day until the sun went down. The first thing Henri et Mott did after getting up extra early in the morning was to carry water from the nearby well. Hauling water was a woman's job, and once she finished filling the big water tank in the house, that chores was complete. By this time, her mother would have prepared breakfast for their family of 4. Breakfast was barley or wheat porridge, as well as cooked vegetables. Sometimes they would have dried fruit as well. After breakfast, she would tend the fields with her parents. Her 10-year-old sister would go into the forest to gather firewood or help the field. When the bell in the middle of the village square, rang to signal noon, everyone would break for lunch. Lunch would be black bread baked several days before, as well as soup with some shredded meat jerky sprinkled in. Field work would resume after lunch, and when the sun set, they would return home for dinner. For dinner, they would have the same black bread that they had for lunch, as well as bean soup. If the village hunter had managed to bag any prey, they might be able to get some meat to go with their dinner. After dinner, the family would gather around the light of the hearth fire to take care of household chores, such as mending worn or damaged clothes. They would go to sleep around 8. The girl, Henri et Mott, was born 16 years ago and had become a part of the village since then. She had lived these days all her life. In her heart, she wondered, how much longer will these unchanging days continue? Today was no different from any other. After waking up, Henri went to the well to carry water. After filling her bucket at the well, she would need 3 trips to fill the house water tank. Yosh! Henri rolled up her sleeves, exposing her untanned skin, which was pale and stood out. Long years of farm life ensured that although her arms looked slender and frail, they were actually very strong, with just a hint of muscle under. The filled buckets were very, very heavy, but Henri hoisted them up like she always did. The buckets were bigger and could make fewer trips. Wouldn't that make things easier? Then again, if the buckets were bigger, she probably wouldn't be able to lift them. As Henri thought about this issue on her way back home, she heard a sound and turned to look at it. There was tension in the air over there. The seeds of fear began sprouting in her heart. Her ears seemed to pick up something like wood being broken, and after that, a scream? It sounded like a strangled bird, but there were no ways it could be a bird's call. A chill ran down Henri's spine. Unbelievable. There must be some kind of mistake. It couldn't have been a human's voice. She tried to erase her unease with these thoughts, and then they vanished. She had to run to the source of the scream, because it was coming from the direction of her home. Henri cast aside the water buckets. She could not run while carrying the heavy burden. Although she nearly tripped over her long skirt, she managed to keep her balance by some stroke of luck. The sound rang throughout the air once more. Henri's heart lurched in her chest. There was no mistake about it. It was a human scream. She ran and ran and ran. Henri could not recall going faster than this in her life. She was running so fast that her legs were about to tangle each other up. The neighs of horses, the scream of people and shouts, these sounds were becoming clearer and clearer. In the distance, Henri could see a familiar man in armor swinging his sword at a villager. The villager collapsed to the ground with a howl of pain, like a puppet whose strings had been cut, and a swift thrust from the swords dealt him a fatal blow. Morgar, son. There were no strangers in a small village like this. Everyone was as close as kin. As such, Henri knew exactly who had been killed before her eyes. Mr. Morgar was a loud but pleasant man. He had done nothing wrong, and did not deserve to die like this. Henri wanted to stop, but in the end she gritted her teeth and ran on. The distance that felt fairly close while carrying water now felt like an endless stretch. As the sounds of shouts and cursing filtered into her ears, she finally saw her home before her. Dad! Mom! Nemo! Henri opened the door as she shouted for her family. She found 3 familiar faces with unfamiliar looks of fear. They were motionless. However, when Henri opened the door and entered, their faces softened, the fear replaced by relief. Henri, are you all right? Her father hugged her in his strong arms, which were browy and trough from fear. Ah, Henri. Her mother's gentle arms embraced her. Good, Henri's back. Then we'd better flee too. The Emot family were in grave danger. They had stayed at home because they were worried about leaving Henri behind, and so they had missed the best chance to escape. The threats to their lives would be catching up with them any moment. As she thought about that fear, it became a reality. Just as the family was about to run, a human figure appeared in the house's doorway. The man, silhouetted by sunlight, glittered. He was a fully armored knight, whose breastplate bore the insignia of the Baharut Empire. He had a long sword in hand. The Baharut Empire was a neighbor of the Reitzi kingdom, and the two of them had waged frequent wars against each other. Once in recent, the flames of war were almost limited to the region around the fortress city of Irantel, and had not spread to this village. However, the quiet life they had enjoyed would end here. Henri could feel the man's cold eyes on her from between the vision slits of his helmet, as though he was counting up how many people were in Henri's family. It frightened her. The knight clenched the gauntlet holding his sword, and a cracking sound came from the metal rubbed against metal. And then just as he was about to enter the house, her father lunged at the man, tackling out of the doorway and out of the house with his momentum. Hurry up and run! Damn you! Blood streamed from a small cut on her father's face. He must have gotten hurt while bull rushing the knight. Henri's father was rolling around as he grappled with the knight on the ground. The knight grappled the hand of Henri's father, which was holding a knife, while he in turn kept the knight from drawing his short sword. The sight of blood on the body of one of her family members made Henri's mind go wild. She wavered over to help her father run away. Henri! Nemo! Her mother's shout returned Henri to her senses, and she looked through at her mother. She saw the older woman shaking her head, with a heartbreaking expression on her face. Henri grasped her little sister's hand, and ran after her mother with big strides. Guilt and hesitation clawed at her heart, but in the end she knew they had to flee into the greater forest of Tal. The neighing of horses, angry shouts, the clash of steel, and the stench of burning flesh. All these assaulted Henri's ears, and none from the direction of the village. Where had it come from? Henri ran with all her might as she tried to make sense of matters. When fleeing to an open space, she had to make her body as small as possible, or hide in the corners of the house. The violent beating of her heart chipped away at the fear that threatened to freeze her body solid. In addition, the small hand she held in hers spurred on. Her sister. Her mother, who was running ahead of her, suddenly froze, and immediately doubled back, her hands frantically gesturing at them to run somewhere else. As Henri realized why her mother would do that, she bit her lip and forced back her tears. She clenched her little sister's hand and ran, trying desperately to get away from there, for she did not want to see what would happen